Hey guys, it's Stephanie with A Northern Gardener. Today I want to talk to you about transitioning your garden into the winter season. What happens when you're done with the fall garden? What do you do with all the plants? So step number one is to harvest everything. Get out all the old fruits and vegetables and herbs that you want to take inside for the year. The second thing you're going to want to do is remove all the weeds. Weeds can reseed themselves and they'll come back stronger next year. Don't forget that some weeds actually can survive in compost and create, again, like they can reseed themselves and come through in your compost soil that you use for your garden in the spring. So you'll want to either burn them, throw them out, or put the weeds in a yard waste bag. Step 3 is to shred your plants and put them in the compost or leave them as a ground cover for your soil as another layer of compost for the winter. Something that you want to be aware of is there are plants that are too thick to just leave in the ground. I would say these tomato plants here are probably a little too thick to just shred and leave in the compost. So I'm actually going to put those in yard waste bags. But actually for now, I'll give you a quick tip is, see, my tomato plants are still quite large, but I still have some fruit growing in them. And here is some, you can see some there. Some fruit growing, and basically what you can do is you can top your tomato plants is take off the maybe a foot or up until the fruit starts, or even just get rid of some of the fruit. If predominantly most of the fruit that hasn't ripened yet is lower on the plant, and you'll focus by topping them, you'll focus more energy towards these fruits up here, or down here I should say, and that will ripen them quicker if you take off what is above them. Step number 4 is planting your garlic, if that's on your to-do list. Step number 5 is your fall pruning. Some things that need pruning are herbs and vegetables and fruits, but the herbs are rosemary, thyme, and sage, so you'll want to prune those back a little bit over for the winter. And then some vegetables and fruit that like to be pruned are asparagus and blackberries. And I found it interesting that blueberries and blackberries are not to be treated the same. Blueberries actually don't prefer a winter pruning. So if you have those plants, look into them a little bit deeper. Step number 6 is to plant your spring bulbs. Between October and November, you'll want to plant all your spring flower bulbs to see those blooms in spring. And step number 7 is you can stop watering when the ground freezes. If you have cover crops going, if you have, marigolds and plants that are flowering, they're still taking on water up until I think they really become fully dormant or dying is when you get a consistent frost. So what I'm actually going to do right now is to take out these pepper plants. They're really not growing anymore. It is kind of sad to take them out early because there is still, vegetables on here, all these peppers, and it's sad, but they're really just not growing anymore. Or if they are, it's just extremely slow. So I am going to put them to rest, take them out, and shred them up and put them in my compost. If my fall garden wasn't still going on, I still have carrots, some tomatoes, some snap peas, lettuce, and beets. I would just leave them in here and just kind of chop them up finely and spread them throughout the soil. But because I'm not ready to do that yet, I'm just going to go throw them in my compost pile. So I'll be quiet for a little bit and you can watch me take out my pepper plants. All right, now that we have that sorted out, I'm going to continue to talk to you about what to do with your garden come winter. So leaving your soil uncovered is bad. I'm not sure if you've given much thought to what you're going to do with your raised beds, your container gardening, or your in the ground no-tilled garden. But leaving your soil uncovered is not good for the soil. It allows for increased erosion, an increase in weeds, all the seeds in the air being dropped by birds still, all the weeds that are in your lawn, those seeds are blowing into your garden and just going to create a hassle and room for fungus for next season for you. Another thing is when you leave your soil exposed, you get a loss of nutrients. Those nutrients are still getting depleted. So one method of covering your soil is using a cover crop. And essentially, a cover crop is a plant or a crop that covers the garden soil. It is grown to essentially die. It's not grown for food. And it covers, you thickly plant your cover plot, your cover crop to cover your garden soil, and then you leave it to die, you cut it down, and it just gets decomposed and composted into your soil, therefore adding nutrients to your soil. Think of cover crops as food for your soil, not food for you. All cover crops are not created equal. There are many different sorts of cover crops, which I'll go through in a bit. Depending on what type of soil amendments or additives that your particular soil needs, you'll find a cover crop that can suit your needs. So, for example, legumes, which also includes clover, but bell beans, fava beans, and alfalfa are nitrogen fixers. Through that nitrogen fixation process that I've talked about a few times, legumes take in nitrogen from the air, a bacteria called, I want to say it's ribosome, in them mixes with that, and it's able to store nitrogen in the bottom of the roots and feed it to the soil, essentially, as well as itself. So legumes are able to introduce more nitrogen to your soil. Grasses such as oats, rye, and barley suppress weeds. They also loosen very compacted soil if that is an issue that you're facing. Other types of crops include buckwheat and mustard, and these just put nutrients into the ground. However, these are also cover crops that flower and can reseed themselves. So if you have something that flowers and it doesn't die completely when it flowers, and it'll seed itself, it essentially just becomes a weed. Even, I guess, flowers that are in a spot where you don't want them could be considered a weed. So that is something to look into. You can also mix and match as well, depending on your soil needs. So if you need nitrogen in your soil as well as you want to suppress weeds, maybe you can do something like clover as well as oats. So like I said earlier, you'll want to plant your cover crop quickly or thickly so no weeds can grow. However, you want to be sure that you do two things. Ensure your plants will die after mowing or weed whacking them down or cutting them down with loppers. Like I said, because they can flower and reseed themselves. So for example, from the Organic Growing School, winter annual rye will die by mowing after it creates a seed head, but before it releases its seed. The Australian winter pea, however, can be cut down at whatever stage and it'll mow. So if you were to cut down the winter annual rye after it had a seed head and it threw seeds everywhere, then you might have an issue. But that winter pea, the Austrian winter pea, seems that you can cut it down whenever, at whatever stage, and it'll die. So that's something to consider. Also, cover crops need to be planted at least 4 weeks before your annual average your first frost, when you're first getting your frost in the fall. Cover crops may seem like they're more for the advanced gardeners. However, you can try something simple. Here's another example from the organic growing school. Plant either hairy vetch and winter rye or winter wheat and crimson clover. Plant them late in the summer and allow them to grow throughout the colder months. Come spring, they will grow very early, and when they mature, then cut them down and turn them into the soil and go forward planting with your spring crops. So that's an easy mixture, an all-in-one kind of just a go-to cover crop that you don't have to worry too much about. However, let's talk about some other things that you can do to amend your soil and to put your soil and garden to rest for the winter. My favorite is composting or mulching. Composting and mulching will prevent the soil from drying out. It'll also protect against erosion and loss of nutrients, and will also inhibit weeds from growing. The more I researched, the more I found out that the fallen leaves from the trees in your area, how good they are for your soil. So basically, trees they have deep roots, and they take all this nutrients to feed itself, and it gets out into their leaves. And when the leaves drop, those leaves are actually supposed to decompose and compost into the ground and then feed the soil and feed the tree. However, unfortunately, that doesn't happen a lot, especially in suburban areas. So what you can do with a lot of those leaves is put them in your garden. As the leaves break down, they introduce carbon-rich nutrients into your soil that aerates and enhances the soil to stimulate further root development and growth. So I'm here to tell you that you can take the leaves, and instead of putting them in bags, you can put them in your garden. However, it is well known to not use, obviously, poison oak or poison ivy leaves. Hopefully you don't have that in your yard, but you don't want to compost with that in your garden or in your compost pile. And you also don't want to use black walnut leaves. Some biological reason it doesn't break down properly. It isn't good for your soil health, so stay away from black walnut. So what do I plan to do? Seeing as that cover crops are still plants and their seeds still need to germinate, I don't know about you, but I'm so excited about my sugar snap peas growing in the garden, as well as all this other activity that I have going here. So I'm really not ready to give up my garden yet for the season in order to get a cover crop going. So what I plan to do is I plan to cut everything down, mix it in, except for my thick tomatoes, and put thick layers of leaves on. They say about 2 to 3 feet of fallen leaves will be good to compost on top. And I'll probably keep this metal fence around here to kind of keep the leaves in. And I am excited to see how nutrient rich my soil is and how the leaves composted in the spring. But that's what I plan to do. Also, don't forget about your pots and your other containers besides your raised bed garden. I don't think it would be a bad idea for you to store pots with maybe a couple inches of leaves on them or inside each other. Why not add nutrients rather than letting the yard waste pick up your leaves? So the last thing to do before you're ready for the winter season is to clean and sharpen your tools. Now that you're done gardening for the year, it's time to face the task that you've been avoiding for days, weeks, if not months, like me. I let my pruners stay outside for weeks, and I'm looking forward to cleaning these bad boys up. Epic Gardening has an excellent video. It's called How to Remove Rust from Your Garden Tools Easily. And I think just watch the video. It's a really great how-to video, and he takes apart his cleaners, and I don't even think you have to take them apart, but he soaks them, I think, in baking soda, and then uses steel wool to remove this rust, and they're good as new. I think he might oil them as well, but these are kind of cheap. I'm not going to trash them, but I think I'll try the baking soda method and see how that works on these guys. Other than that, I mean, that's what I plan on doing. Just make sure to cover your soil. Some people just put a tarp down over it to protect it from the wind and just eroding out, losing your nutrients. So if you don't have access to leaves, again, don't forget my other composting tips. You can use sticks, you can use dried pine needles. If you live by the ocean, you can use algae and have some phenomenal compost. There's many different things that you can compost with: hay, leaves, pine needles, organic material. You can do it, and it'll add tons of nutrients for your spring garden and get you kicked off to a great start. So this is Stephanie with A Northern Gardener. Happy gardening.